Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. I'm back with Jonathan for part 2 of creating a birch forest. In part 1 of this series, we created a bonsai forest planting using 9 European silver birches.
So today what we're going to do is prune all the trees to an asymmetrical view, plus we'll do all the landscaping. So we're going to do the pruning first.
One of the first things we want to consider when we're pruning this forest is how high do we want the overall height. At the moment, your eye is kind of drawn into the base of the planting, and then you have to look way up here to the apex of the trees. So I think that's too high. I think the height should be brought down to more about this level, and you can get an idea of what it looks like, the forest, by coming in front of the forest and putting your hands in front to create an asymmetrical triangle. So I'll do that now. I'm standing in front of the forest now, looking at the trees, and I'll place my hand in front and kind of create a asymmetrical triangular profile, and I can get a good idea of what the overall composition will look like. So probably somewhere in about here is about right. The pruning operation will start with the largest tree in the forest, which is this one right here, and we're trying to determine a point where to cut it back. We definitely want these two lower branches to survive, and birches are known for dieback, so we're going to cut the trunk somewhere in this section, and we may get some new budding coming out of there, or it could die right back to this first branch here. So there's two possibilities. We're hoping it buds out, but you know, if it did die back to these branches, the height is still okay. We're still at a good height for the forest. So we were looking for leaf scars where new potential buds could come out, and there's some here, there's one here, there's one here. So we're thinking if we prune up here, we've got a lot of potential new branches that could come out off of this trunk, and hopefully something will develop in that area. And we're going to make an angled cut. That'll help water run off the cut point, so it should help prevent rotting of the main trunk. I think the trunk is thin enough that it'll heal over within a year or two completely, so I don't think we have to worry about the trunk rotting down and making a hollow trunk. If this was a larger birch, that would happen. If you made a big cut, it would rot out. So Jonathan is going to make the first cut.
This is an OMG cut.
So here we go. Done.
Wow.
That changes the look.
Yes, it does.
The next step is to prune the branches back to make the tree more compact, so all these branches aren't overlapping each other. So we want to prune back to a part of the branch that has nice healthy foliage on it. So it's better to prune back a little longer and see what happens than to prune back too short and have the branch die off. So I think we're probably going to prune it somewhere in this area, and Jonathan can decide where he wants to make that cut, right there. And same with this branch on this side. I probably somewhere around here, do you think?
Right about there?
Yeah. There.
Yep.
And then there's a back branch here that can also be pruned back. Maybe I would go, maybe,
right about
yeah,
there.
about there. There. And that keeps that tree quite compact. And we've got lots of, we could always grow this tree taller if we want that tall, elegant look to the forest, but I think this height is quite good for the size of the pot and the planting. The tree beside the one we just pruned, this one, is on top of the hill at the bottom here, and you would think that would naturally be the tallest tree in the planting, but if you were to prune that triangle form up here, it would echo the soil line exactly. You would get this triangular shape and then the canopy's triangular shape, and it would look probably a little artificial. So by keeping this as the main tree and the tallest tree, our asymmetrical canopy shape will be offset from the soil line a bit, and you'll get that sort of natural feel. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep this as the tallest tree and taper them back almost in a curvature towards the lip of the pot. So we'll have these rounded triangles each side of the canopy.
So the right-hand side of the forest is the one that we're going to start with, coming from this one to this tree, and then finally to the outside tree. So it's now a matter of one of us looking on and saying higher or lower,
Okay.
and working our way to the edge of the pot.
Yeah.
So Nigel, where do you think this ought to be?
A little lower. Keep it about there.
About there.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
And then that would make this one about here or
Just
lower?
a little lower. There.
Right about here?
Yeah.
Okay, and this one here, which has a lot going on here,
Probably.
right about here?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say right about there.
And there we go.
And that gets that shape.
How does that look?
It looks really good. That looks good.
Just finding our way to the next tree is quite monumental because of the number of branches coming out that distract us.
Okay.
So
I'm just.
where do you think here, Nigel?
Okay. You've got
I got to go back here like this.
a little lower.
Lower
Tell
than
you
that?
what. Keep coming down and
Right under
right
there?
about there.
There we go.
Yeah. And then,
You want me to cut this one?
yeah, that tall.
Do you want it right off, or do you want me to cut it even with this?
Yeah, I would cut it there. Keep some branching up top there.
Okay. And then this one.
Yeah, I would prune that one just off above that bud.
There we go.
Yeah.
And then this one would be here or
A
here?
little lower, I would, yeah, maybe there. So I'm just sighting it up. So the point where we want to cut that off is just right about at the deadwood.
Okay. Well,
So-
we're going to take the deadwood out, right?
Yeah, I think deadwood doesn't last long on a deciduous tree, so
We might as well
it
just.
gets soft and it rots away in
it's
1 or
just
2
going
years.
to cause a problem down the road anyway.
Yeah. So if you can do a bit of an angle cut and just, yeah, it might be tough. Oh,
There we go.
how strong was that? I'm just gonna snap the wood. It still had some strength in
Yeah, it
it.
had a little bit in it.
Yeah. And then, yeah, this one we'll want to prune off quite short to here
Yep.
because it's getting.
Do you want to look at the profile again?
Yeah. I'll,
Right about.
yeah, a little lower than that even.
I'm going to do. How about right? There's a bud right about.
Okay, yeah, right about there.
Right about there.
That looks good. Perfect.
Okay.
And then that branch out front, approximately that same height. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a branch coming quite far back here that could be pruned back shorter,
This one here.
just because they're all interfering with each other. You gotta kind of keep each tree in its own
Yes.
space.
And this one? We can leave it
I would
for
leave
now.
that, yeah. That's not.
That's not.
So there's really just, there's these back ones. We should do those next, I think.
Okay.
And I'll tell you where. It's facing outwards, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that whole branch needs to be positioned out here or pruned off, one of the two. And then this one needs a bit of reduction. I would probably go right back just above there. We're tweaking the overall profile now. We've kind of got the profile, if you're looking from the front view, in our asymmetrical triangle. And the next step is to come and look at the forest from the side view. And we want the tallest trees in the front, and we want to taper it back to give that forest perspective. So the trees further back will be a little shorter than the trees up front.
So when we look from the side, one of the profiles that we need to adjust now is highest to lowest in the back. And as you can see, we've got a flat plateau here, and we've got one sticking up too far here. So now we have to make the adjustments from front to back. So Would you say, Nigel, that maybe that this might be the spot, or should I go higher?
I think that's about the right height there.
Right there?
Yeah.
So off that
with
one
its
comes. That didn't quite get it all.
A little bit tweaking there. There we go.
There we go. And then this one
that
here,
one needs to come back. And
about there or higher?
yeah, I would try it there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's looking better.
Now this might have to come back a bit.
Yeah.
That's dead anyway. That leaf's coming off.
I would say we could shorten this one just a little bit too, Jonathan.
About
I would maybe to about here.
about there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's looking
Not bad.
not bad, yeah.
Is this a little too high or
It is.
just a bit,
It's
right?
a little high, yeah.
Maybe about here?
Yeah. And this may change as new growth comes in, but it's a starting point.
So now we've got...
There is a branch interfering here with the...
Oh, yes.
I think we maybe have to shorten that too. I know we left it along originally in case something died back, but...
You can always cut it off, but you can't put it back.
Yeah, I know. Now we're looking at the individual trees and how they interact with each other. What branches are, going in front of other trees. Looking at the styling of each tree, there's a kind of an ugly knob coming off the top of this tree that we may have to do some correction work. Yeah, so we're just kind of fine-tuning the design now, seeing if there's anything that needs removing. We've got a tree here that has two branches coming out off the trunk at the same spot, and we've got this nice upright kind of branch or trunk here, and these two branches are interfering with each other. So we're going to keep the branch off of this side and remove the branch on this side.
Oh,
There. So now all these branches, have their own space.
So we have two things going on here. The specific thing is that we've got one in front of the other here as far as trunks go. And we're trying to make a decision, should we cut this one off or this one off? We've decided to leave them both until spring, and it may be an automatic decision. Maybe this will die, maybe this will die. Maybe they'll both come up and we'll have a better opportunity to make that decision. But over here we have an issue, and we've got just too many branches coming out here, and this would probably be the likely candidate to be removed because there we go. That's much cleaner there. And yeah, I think we're almost there for this part of the trimming process.
Here's a look at all the branches that we've pruned off the trees. A lot of the trees are almost dormant. Some of the lower leaves were going yellow and falling off them. So there's very little time left in the growing season, so it's not a bad time to be pruning the trees. It is quite hard to see the overall profile of the forest with this background, but we're kind of doing that on purpose because we're going to do the final reveal in the end once it's all landscaped. Step 2, and the final step for today, we'll be doing the landscaping. And Jonathan's brought some limestone rocks from up north that we may integrate into the planting. The only trouble with the rocks is that it makes the landscape even heavier. So these rocks, they're fairly light for a rock, and they're not that large, so it won't add a whole lot of weight to the overall planting, but you just have to be careful. If you start adding large rocks, it can get really heavy and hard to lift. In part 1 of the video, we kind of roughed in the overall shape of our hill in our landscape, and we tried to get away from making it too triangular looking by kind of creating, bumps and texture to it. And we may be doing more of that tweaking today. Before we add the moss, this is a very, very porous soil mixture, and I think the moss layer would dry out too quickly if we applied the moss directly over this, very loose soil. So we may be applying a finer soil or even a layer of sand on top and then applying the moss to that. Jonathan and I were playing around with rocks. We like the idea of having kind of a the hill coming up and then dropping off with a cliff here. But we found that these rocks are the same color as the trunks, and no matter where we positioned the rocks, it just took away from the trunks of the trees. Your eye didn't know where to look, to the bright colored rocks or the bright colored trunks. So in the end, we've decided not to use any rocks at all and just landscape with moss. We're just in the process of removing some of the soil. You have to think you'll get a moss layer on top of this soil, and you don't want it looking like it's bulging out of the pot. So we're removing some of the soil and doing a bit of, contouring to the landscape just to get it ready for applying the moss.
So the adjustment of the Akadama base here has had to come down considerably, especially around the edges, because we've got a layer of moss, and this plateau we've taken off about as far as we can go because we've got a layer of roots here now. And just to show you how that is going to fit in there, you can see that this particular moss is very, very thick. So we're trying to make the adjustment so that we don't have these big bumps of moss and containers, so it adjusts to the edge of the pot.
I think I mentioned earlier that I thought this soil was maybe a little too porous to have the moss survive on top of it. So we have decided to put a layer of sand on top of the soil and then apply the moss over top of the sand. And I think that'll keep the moss hydrated better so it doesn't dry out on hot days.
So we're going to add about 1/4 of an inch of soil. Is that right?
Yeah, I think of sand, yeah.
Sand?
Yeah, I think that'll just enough to cover the bonsai soil and give it a base to apply the moss on top of. This is a good coarse sand. Where did you get this sand from?
It's pool filter sand, actually.
Pool filter sand.
Yeah.
That is much better than playground sand.
It's and this is like used, so it's got a lot of organics in it, so that's why I kept it.
Okay. There's no chlorine or anything in it?
No, not now.
Okay. That wouldn't be good.
No, that wouldn't be good.
Okay, so it's pool filter sand. It looks really nice. It's very coarse.
It's a coarse sand, and
I'm going to look for that. That's a good tip. I learned something today. This forest planting is going to look quite different with sand on top. It'll look like a desert.
It'll look like the desert, that's for sure. Because this sand is damp, it kind of flows nice. It doesn't fall away.
We've got the layer of sand applied to the landscape now, and it really reveals all the contours of the landscape. So we're making sure that it doesn't look too smooth and even, that it looks rough and there's little plateaus here and there. And that'll make it look more natural in the end, so it won't look like one smooth big hill. So the next step will be to apply the moss.
So we'll start laying our moss in. We got this lovely section of moss that goes right out, and we're kind of liking this section here with the sand. It kind of looks like a beach coming up to a terrace, and we'll see how that looks in the end. It's very, very, very nice.
Where did you collect this moss from, Jonathan?
It was actually near my home.
Okay. In a forest?
In a forest, yeah.
Okay, so it's
natural, very natural, out of a forest, and it's shade.
It's shade moss.
Shade moss. So we'll have to see if this, in fact, survives the summertime. If it doesn't, then we'll have to make some adjustments.
Yeah. I found this kind of moss has a tough time in the summertime. It will survive once it gets established, but it's best to protect it from the hot afternoon sun.
Yes.
And once the trees fill out, they'll get more of a canopy on top, and it should help. It'll kind of provide some shade for the moss, and because I found it does quite well underneath the trees. Just when it's out in an open space, it can dry out. And it doesn't die, it just turns brown. You do have to mist it a lot, but
I had some of this selected back in the July time frame, and it seemed to do not too bad.
Okay.
Because my bench is actually shaded, I would say, about 50% of the time. So
Okay.
we'll see.
Yeah, it's the kind of, moss is the kind of thing you've just got to try it. And if you have success, then, you know, keep growing that species. If you don't, then you try a different one.
Right.
If you have a really sunny yard, I collect moss that's growing in full sun. If you have a shady yard, then you may have to use a shade moss. And this moss is quite a bit coarser than some of the mosses that grow in full sun, but for this large planting, I think the size is quite nice. It suits this scale of a forest. Here's a look at the planting so far, and it's making good progress. We're really liking this beach area over here. It looks really natural, and it looks like a nice place you'd want to be. In the middle of the forest here, we've kind of got the outline of a kind of natural pathway, and we're not quite sure what we're going to do with that section yet. It may be a finer textured moss just to break it up so we have a variety of textures in the forest. Or it could be, you know, a sand kind of pathway, maybe a different color of sand than the beach or something, a darker color. We'll play around with that, but the overall planting is looking really nice. So we're getting into the final stages, and it's looking good. Jonathan and I went out to the Sidewalk of Plenty and collected some of this nice fine velvety moss. So we're going to put that in this section here and see how it looks. We may want it halfway between moss and sand in the end. I don't know, we'll play around with it, see if we can come up with something that looks really nice. You can hear the construction work continuing in the background for the plant room roof. They're working away at it.
I think I'm going to have to really keep an eye on the dampness of this moss over the next month.
Yes. Everything's looking good on the landscape. We do want to put some playground sand in this area. So the playground sand's a little finer than the coarse pool sand. And just put a hint of a pathway in here, just so it's not all green. It'll break up the greenery a bit, and the pathway will be a little more visible. So we'll do that now. I'm going to start placing the sand now, and I want the pathway to kind of curve around and disappear behind this tree back here. So I'm going to start at the tree, and most of this will get washed away, so it'll just be a subtle trace of the sand left in the end. But it'll just define that pathway just a little bit more. And these are the kind of details you'd want to do before a show. Just these final kind of touch-ups and stuff. Because the moss will probably grow through this sand in a matter of weeks, and you know, you'd have to redo this again. Now, I want a bit of a curve here. I don't want it to look too even. We'll put a little more over here. Curve it over this way. And then maybe over here. And then snaking her down here. I'll apply the water now to blend the sand in with the moss. So here I go. And I'll have a look and see how that looks. We stepped back and had a look at the planting, and we thought it looked too flowing, this different type of moss. And I thought, well, we need some clumps of the coarse moss in there to break it up, to kind of make the pathway a little more twisty, and to sort of blend the coarse moss in with the fine moss. That's hard to say, coarse moss. So we're just going to plant little clumps of the coarser moss in and just yeah, give the pathway more of a meandering feel to it. Jonathan and I have been doing some fine-tuning. We added some sand over on this side, and it kind of balances the look of the sand on this side and kind of gives, I don't know, more of a feeling like you're up by the lake or something up north. And we also added a few rocks, and these are just rocks from the gravel driveway. They're very small. You can see the size of my hand here. But they just add another element to the landscape that adds a bit of believability to it, that makes it look like a miniature landscape, and it kind of draws your eye in and you start exploring. It's not a boring landscape, but it's not too busy either. It's just subtle, and it looks very natural with the trees. We finished the project and moved it into the sunlight for the first time. And what did you think, Jonathan? Did it turn out okay?
It turned out better than I expected.
Well, that's good to hear.
It's always, it's almost kind of like, what's my first child going to look like, right?
Right. Yeah.
And in this particular case, you know,
You're not sure until it's born, right?
No, and you know, with the height of those trees originally, and where we had to prune them down to, knowing that trees grow,
yeah,
and that when these come up in the spring, they won't be stressed because they've got all that foliage to
yes,
furnish with food. So
yeah, we've reduced them quite a bit, and
yeah,
we didn't take a whole lot off the roots. And
no, oh no.
And you're going to bury this pot into the ground for the winter?
Yes, I will nail these into the ground about 6 inches.
Yeah.
So that the warmth of the lower surface of the ground will try to keep these roots not too severely affected.
Yeah.
We'll be mulching them with pine mulch.
Yeah.
I will also have them in a corner of my fencing so that we'll have burlap on one side so that it's not gonna, it will absorb the wind actually.
Right.
And then I'm thinking that after Christmas, when the Christmas trees are available for free,
yeah,
I'll put some conifers up as a lean-to.
To break the wind.
To break the wind and,
yeah,
and naturally absorb it like they were in the forest.
Yes, yeah. And you can also put some burlap over top of the landscape, so when you backfill it with
exactly
mulch, that it doesn't, you can peel it off and you can see your moss easily.
Exactly,
so it doesn't.
Exactly. That would be a nightmare to try to clean off in the spring.
It would. You'd be out with the tweezers picking away stuff, and so yeah. So you do want to cover it up before you mulch over
Absolutely.
top. And that should be fine. It should keep the pot and the trees safe for the winter.
Now we can see all of the trunks the way they are in the forest, which is exactly what we want to come out. Yeah. And then when the canopy develops in the spring, it should be a beautiful composition.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful composition right now.
Yeah. Okay, well, it is time now for the reveal of the forest. Are you ready? Here we go.
So here's our composition, the silver birch forest. From all of the collecting of our trees, the pot, the soil, the trimming of the roots, the trimming of the canopy, and I couldn't be more happy and ecstatic about how this is going to look on my bench. Thank you very much, Nigel.
You're very welcome. That's all for today. We got the European silver birch forest off to a good start. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.